Next speaker needs no introduction, Deepak Chopra. He very much wanted to participate with us this session today. Unfortunately, he's traveling, but I was able to sit down with him a few days back, and he has recorded this for us. Before we do it, let me just read a little of his biography. Deepak Chopra is the founder of the Chopra Foundation, a nonprofit entity for research on well-being and humanitarianism, and Chopra Global, a modern-day health company at the intersection of science and spirituality. He's a world-renowned pioneer in integrative medicine and personal transformation. Chopra is an adjunct professor of urology at Mount Sinai and professor of internal medicine at the University of Central Florida, as well as a clinical professor of family medicine and public health at the University of California, San Diego. He serves as a senior scientist with the Gallup organization, and he is the author of over 90 books translated into over 43 languages, including numerous New York Times bestseller. For the last 30 years, Chopra has been at the forefront of the meditation revolution, and his 91st book, Total Meditation, helps to achieve new dimensions of stress-free living and joyful living. Time magazine has described Dr. Chopra as one of the top 100 heroes and icons of the century. So with that, let's begin with Deepak.
Hello, my friends. This is Dr. Deepak Chopra, and it's a great privilege for me to be recording this message for you on the grand occasion of Erwin Laszlo's new paradigm expressions regarding cosmology and a deeper understanding of cosmic consciousness, or what we call fundamental reality. So, of course, I've spent my entire career trying to figure this out. And what I'd like to share with you is some of the ideas that we have shared with the world at the Chopra Foundation, which is a nonprofit 501c3, and also some of my current thinking on the nature of reality. So with that, I'd like to show you the first slide. May I have the first slide, please? This is the first slide, and some of the insights I'm going to share with you also found in my book, Meta-Human, which talks about the next stage of human evolution, but also about meta-reality and metaverses, which are becoming part of our lingo these days, our language. And that's a good sign, because language always precedes insight, and language is part of the evolution of the human species, which creates models of reality. So everything we know in today's science is based on a model of reality, and these models keep changing. What is the reality that is behind the models that we create as humans? So I'd like to move to the next slide, please. You will see that what we call meta reality is based on a very ancient aphorism that comes to us from the Upanishads. And the Upanishads are the expression of sages and scientists. I call them scientists of consciousness, that are considered luminaries in the spiritual tradition of India. So in Sanskrit, this phrase reads, Yatha Pinde Tatha Brahmande, as is the atom, so is the universe, as is the microcosm, so is the macrocosm, as is the human mind, so is the cosmic mind, as is the human body, so is the cosmic body. A kind of a prelude to our current models of the holographic understanding of the universe, the holo movement that we call the universe, that we experience in our own consciousness. So before we go into the deeper nature of existence, the first point I want to make today is that what we call our body-mind and also our experience of the world is the metabolism of experience. There's an ancient aphorism in Ayurveda. If you want to know what your experiences were like in the past, you can look at your body and the world right now, because that's the expression of the metabolism of experience. If you want to know what your body and the world will look like in the future, then you can look at your experiences right now. And so experiences are actually space-time events in awareness or consciousness. And we interpret them as mind, body, and universe. Space-time events. They're a continuum of space-time event. Each space-time event is actually a perceptual snapshot. But the continuity of these perceptual snapshots in the midst of being or awareness gives rise to the movie that we call the changing body-mind universe experience. If I can see the next slide, then you will see that our physical body is a dynamic activity of seeming non-change in the midst of change. Seeming non-change, because if I look at your body right now, it doesn't seem to be changing. If I take a snapshot of your body now on my camera, that's it. And then I take another snapshot immediately after that, it seems the same. But over a course of time, we recognize that in every moment, the body and the world you're experiencing is dynamic activity, looks like non-change in the moment, but it is changing. And this seeming non-change in the midst of change in biology is referred to as homeostasis or self-regulation. So normally we interpret our outer life as perceptions such as sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell. But of course, our outer life is also, if somebody is looking at you, at your body mind, they can see that every day you cycle through sleep and waking stage. And of course, the sleep stage also has a dream element to it. In fact, the dream element and deep sleep are about equal in proportion. We also breathe every day, we eat every day, we metabolize every day, we interact with what we call the environment every day, with nature, and ultimately with the totality of the universe that is expressing itself as our immediate experience that we call outer life. Of course, that's just a phrase, outer life. As we'll see, there is no inner and outer as far as awareness is concerned. The inner life, of course, is very private, although we can make some guesses when we look at somebody's facial expressions or their body language. We might be able to guess what's happening in their inner life. We have about 43 facial muscles that express over 100 emotions, and emotions are thoughts linked to sensations. As a result of this, we experience what we call inner life: thoughts, emotions, memories, desires, imagination, creativity. Some of us, for introspection, is part of our daily practice. And then, of course, we have intuition and higher vision and the desire for transcendence. All this we call our inner life, but actually both inner and outer are modifications of awareness given different labels. This is something very interesting right now, that we are looking at new paradigms through the window of science. These are cover issues of The New Scientist, questioning what is reality, questioning the idea that your entire body is a thought process. You'll see some more interesting covers of the emerging paradigms. Is evolution just random mutations and natural selection, or is evolution guided by consciousness? Is the universe itself conscious? What is the flaw at the heart of reality? Because the current models, cosmological models, including cosmic inflation, including the fine-tuning of what we call the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe for mind and consciousness, the cosmological constant, what we call the standard model of physics, are all revealing themselves to be incomplete, even though they work as far as technology is concerned, or everything we do today is based on science and technology. And all we can say about science and technology is it works. But it works notwithstanding all the current conundrums, which I just mentioned: cosmic inflation, fine-tuning, what happened in the Planck epoch, what is happening right now at the level of the quantum vacuum, why are there inconsistencies in understanding cosmic inflation, very huge inconsistencies between measured values and which are observed values and theoretical mathematical values. And also the very fundamental question, why is mathematics, which is an activity in consciousness, so unreasonably effective, something that Eugene Wigner pointed out. To say that we really understand reality from a scientific perspective right now would be actually stretching that statement. We do not understand the scientific basis of even perception. It's called the hard problem of consciousness. And of course, all the models we have, whether it's classical model or Newtonian model or the quantum mechanical model, they all have flaws. Quantum mechanics is an amazing recipe for making calculations and predictions. But if you go Google, check out Wikipedia and the interpretations of quantum mechanics, you'll find over 30, which shows that we do not actually understand the meaning behind these amazing scientific discoveries, which have radically changed our view or model of what we call the universe. Remember that science has only been around for 500 years. It started about the European Enlightenment, the era of Isaac Newton, but also Descartes and other European philosophers, including later Wittgenstein and some amazing thinkers. But the scientific revolution is only 500 years, and relativity and quantum mechanics are about 100 years. And they've radically changed our experience of what we call the universe. And yet none of those theories actually are complete in that they answer the basic questions we have. If there was a Big Bang, what existed before? What was the cause of the Big Bang? Were there fundamental laws of nature, as we call them, in the Planck epoch? Why was cosmic inflation, where the universe tripled in size every trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second, from almost nothing to the size of a grapefruit, and then again slowed down? So now we have a universe where the cosmic horizon is 47 billion light years away from us, and galaxies are tumbling across it. And even space-time is expanding and becoming vaster, a result of dark energy, the anti-gravity force that we have no idea what it is. So let's see the next slide. Given what I've showed you right now, I want to digress a little bit in that if you understand what we call inner and outer life and what we call metabolism of experience, then we can understand how to use experience to self-regulate our bodies, our changing bodies. And if we can self-regulate our changing bodies and integrate body, mind, and spirit as one unified process in consciousness, then we can hope to actually harvest these insights for a life which is healthy, and longevity and health span can come together so that we can aspire, as the ancient sages of the Upanishads did, to a healthy life beyond 100 years and in good health, and death as a choice in meditation, what is called Mahasamadhi. So these are very important pillars of well-being: sleep, with deep sleep particularly, and dream state for the detoxification of the physical body and the emotional body, meditation and stress management for integration of mind, body, spirit, and self-regulation, movement, yoga, mind-body coordination through yoga, pranayama, breathing exercises, that we can use to activate our vagus nerve and vagal tone, so we can counteract the effects of sympathetic overdrive, which is the pandemic of our civilization. Healthy emotions such as empathy, compassion, love, joy, equanimity, and transcendence of emotions ultimately. Nutrition, basically, we are beginning to understand now that a diet that has maximum diversity of plant-based foods, that is farm to table, can change 99.9% of the genetic information in our body and ultimately change the entire software of the body, because only 1% of genetic information is human, or less than 1%, and that too can be upgraded. We have a lot of research showing that epigenetic modulations can actually activate genes for self-regulation and homeostasis, deactivate genes for inflammation, accelerated aging, and chronic illness. Only 5% of disease-related gene mutations are fully penetrant, in that they guarantee disease. The remaining are modifiable through lifestyle. So if we can change the software of the body 99.9%, then we can, of course, change the printout, which is the evolving, changing body-mind system. Huge promise, but actually the equations of quantum mechanics right now suggest that the arrow of time is bidirectional, and this is something I'm experimenting with right now at the Chopra Foundation. It's called the Longevity Project, which combines modern insights from quantum mechanics, quantum metabolism, quantum biology, but also lifestyle measures and genetics and epigenetics into actually looking at lengthy health spans. If you're interested in that, you can also send an email to longevity@choprafoundation.org and become a participant in the longevity experiment. The sixth item here is biological rhythms. And as you know, we have 4 rhythms at least that govern our biology. Circadian rhythm, as the earth spins on its own axis. Seasonal rhythm, as the earth goes around the sun. Gravitational rhythms, as a result of the varying movements of the earth, sun, and moon in relationship to each other, but ultimately a result of the activity of the total universe. So we have circadian rhythms, seasonal rhythms, gravitational rhythms, lunar rhythms, and our body is part of those rhythms, those cosmic rhythms. And even though we call the universe, which means one song, we don't actually live our lives in harmony with that one song. Our body does its best through tuning into those rhythms. We can't hear the tune of that one song, but our body certainly is dancing to it all the time. Now, these are very important 7 pillars of well-being, but in the absence of the 7th, which is understanding ourself, our true self, not our ego identity, not our body-mind, but the true self, in which the body-mind is a changing process, we can actually go beyond the fear of death and understand that in transcendence, we have a different identity, which is beyond space and time. And in transcendence, we have the spontaneous emergence of Platonic values such as truth, goodness, beauty, harmony, love, compassion, joy, equanimity, and also the absence of the fear of death. This is the essential spiritual experience, or even religious experience, before it is codified into dogma or theology or religious institutions. So with that, let's go a little deeper into the nature of reality. Is reality physical or non-physical? This argument has been going on in the West since Aristotle and Plato. As you know, Plato was an idealist. The world is an expression of ideas in the mind, and his student Aristotle was a physicalist. So we can say Plato was amongst the first philosophers, including in the West, Pythagoras and Parmenides and Hermes Megistus and many others. And of course, he idealized Socrates as the ultimate teacher. Whether Socrates was a real person or not, we don't know. Aristotle had a student called Alexander the Great who came all the way from Macedonia to India. And actually, there was a convergence between Greek and Indian philosophy at that time. And Alexander the Great, who died at a very young age and went back to Greece with a lot of scholarly introduction to ancient Vedic thought as well. During the European Enlightenment, René Descartes popularized the philosophy of dualism, which means that mind and body are two separate entities. This philosophy is not tenable anymore. It violates scientifically all the laws of thermodynamics, and we can't go into this right now, but dualism doesn't make any sense. If mind and body are different, then how do they interact with each other? What is the agent that communicates mind to body? And why can I lift my arm up or do anything like speak or move? The reason is that my body and mind are probably ultimately made of the same substance, which is a non-substance. So this brings us to a very major issue in science, and that is called naive realism. So naive realism is also called scientific realism, which is based on certain premises. The first premise of naive realism is that the physical world is exactly what it looks like to the five human senses: sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell. That the physical world is actually exactly what is perceived by the five human senses. There are many problems with that. The five human senses sense a very narrow band of activity that we call the universe, less than 0.1%. Every sense is misleading. My senses tell me the earth is flat. Nobody believes that anymore. My senses tell me that the ground I'm standing on is stationary. It's spinning at dizzying speeds and hurtling through space at thousands of miles an hour. And my senses tell me that you're a three-dimensional object moving in space-time, which is also made of objects. And we know that everything solid is proportionately as void as intergalactic space. If you could see me as I really am, you'd see a huge emptiness with a few scattered dots and spots and random electrical discharges. And even those random electrical discharges are modified forms of emptiness, whatever that is. So naive realism seems very misleading when it comes to understanding reality. Naive realism also assumes subject-object split, which is artificial. And naive realism assumes an embodied observer, but no observer can be found in the body because the body itself is an observation like everything else. Naive realism, while it's good as scientific inquiry, is based on what I think are false premises. There is no physical world to speak of. The physical world is a human interpretation for a species-specific mode of experiences through narrow bands of perceptual activity. This is an argument that the great sage, seer Rabindranath Tagore, also a Bengali poet, had with Einstein in 1930, where Einstein actually made a compromise to Tagore when he said, "Science is my religion." Religion because I have faith in the scientific method. And that's good enough for doing experiments, but is definitely not good enough for understanding reality. In fact, there is no science of consciousness because science itself is an activity in consciousness. It was created in consciousness and particularly in human consciousness. So if reality is non-physical, then what is it made of? And this is what we call a non-material monism. This is the non-dual philosophies that have ancient traditions in Vedanta and Kashmir Shaivism, in many non-dual traditions, including some aspects of Buddhism as well, and also the Gnostic Gospels in the West. Does it matter if you know reality? And I'm using matter as a verb here, not as a noun. And if it matters, then what is mattering as what we call our experience of the universe? Are we creating our own reality? And if so, how? Look at this picture right now, and I ask you, can you see a Mexican on a horse with a person sleeping on the sidewalk? Or can you see an old man with a beard? And the answer is, what you actually experience visually is a bunch of colors. That's it. Colors, shapes, and forms are interchangeable. In the absence of color, there's no shape or form. That's what's happening in consciousness. If a baby was looking at this, all it would experience is colors. But then human constructs come in. We call a certain combination of colors right now a Mexican on a horse. But the same combination of colors we can also call an old man with a beard. And the difference is we give meaning or constructs to our experience of color. And that's how we create our visual reality that we call the objective world, or even the objective body, because there's no such thing. It's a combination of colors. That's it, visually. And the same principle holds true for all the other senses. It's a combination of sensory experiences: sound, touch, sight, taste, smell, texture. That's all we experience. Raw experience directly is perceptual modification of consciousness appearing as that, appearing as this, appearing as the world. Now look at the next slide, and the same principle holds true. Okay, all these are basically to show you that what you experience is colors. That's it, visually. But then you transpose meaning to colors, and in this case, you can see a woman with beautiful locks, or you can see two horses against a background of sun and sky. The meaning you give shapes your perception, and of course, those perceptions shape emotions and everything else that we call reality. Everyday reality is human meaning imposed on sensations. Period. These sensations could be sense perceptions, but also faint images in consciousness, or emotions, or feelings, or thoughts. Sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts are the raw experience of everyday reality. And then, of course, they're interpreted as mind, body, and universe. That's how we create our reality, both personal and collective. If you look at the four dots in the center of this picture and you stare at them for a while, and then you look at the white background outside the darkness here, you might see Jesus Christ or Moses, or the whole point here is that everything that we see as outer reality is a projection of our own consciousness, and that includes our own physical body. Here, if you look at the dots in the center of the nose, stare at them for a while, and then if you can, actually look at the space outside or at the ceiling, you might see what you might call the real girl. In fact, these are all perceptual hallucinations. And everything that you see, touch, taste, smell, think about, visualize, imagine, conceptualize, is actually not there. It is a modification of consciousness appearing as that, and that too, the snapshot is very short in duration. It's almost instantly over as soon as it's born. So every experience as a snapshot is an ephemeral, transient, evanescent, ungraspable snapshot, sensation. But it gives continuity because in between the snapshots is the presence of awareness, which creates a storyline and a meaning, and ultimately creates what we call the experience of body, mind, and the world. It's an interesting picture I wanted to show you because the face you see over there actually doesn't exist in the picture, but the animals you see, and the birds you see, and the leopard you see, and the tree you see, and the mountain you see is also not there in the picture. All there is a combination of colors, which are modifications of your own awareness as that. And that holds true for all senses. Let's see the next slide and see where we are going. all experience is constructed in consciousness or awareness. And today we use models like quantum entanglement, which means at the most fundamental level, particles and waves are entangled, are actually all one before they manifest or differentiate into what we call differences or the diversity of experience. At the same time, qualia are entangled at the most fundamental level. Qualia are qualities of experience like color, fragrance, odor. Then we impose meaning to that. This is the smell of garlic. And now it becomes the smell of garlic. But that's a construct, as is garlic a construct. These qualia entanglements and quantum entanglements are a result of what we call meaning entanglement, which all results in the metabolism of experience, which gives us the experience of what we call everyday reality. So the construction of everyday reality is basically perceptual experience that is conceived, constructed, governed, and comes into existence in what we call fundamental reality or consciousness. And in the same way we construct visual experience, we construct auditory experience, tactile experience, taste and smell experience. And the confederation of these perceptual activities, that narrow band of human perception, creates the construct of the physical world, including the physical body. If you have stayed with me this far, then matter and the physical world are convenient fictions. You and I, as body minds, are fictional characters in a collective dreamscape that we have together fashioned. So in the Yoga Vasishtha in one verse says, together we have created each other and the universe in our fancy. Wittgenstein, the great Western philosopher, said, we are asleep, our life is a dream, but once in a while we wake up enough to know that we are dreaming. And of course, the Buddha said, this lifetime of ours is transient as autumn clouds. To watch the birth and death of beings is like looking at the movements of a dance. A lifetime is like a flash of lightning in the sky, rushing by like a torrent down a steep mountain. But the Buddha also means waking up from this dream into fundamental reality, where we recognize that perceptual activity is species and culture specific with overlapping cross-species bandwidths of experience, leaky margins, the leaky fictional characters and the leaky world that we construct. My goal right now is not only to evolve from human to metahuman, which means waking up from the conditioned mind, all the cultural, religious, scientific, mythical conditioning that has been going on since the beginning of the cognitive revolution, when humans started to create narratives around fundamental experiences of sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts. So in order to wake up, there are certain steps that we need. Non-reactivity to override the midbrain conditioned responsive, which are now become instinctive, and also the emotional responses that are instinctive. And I've used this as a formula, STOP, as an acronym, STOP. S stands for stop, T, take 3 deep breaths and smile, O, observe your breath or any sensations in the body, and then proceed with awareness and loving kindness. And this opens the window to divine attitudes like gratitude, loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity. It leads to non-judgmental awareness of external and internal world, which are, as I just said, mind-forged manacles or constructs. It leads to introception, which is the ability to know what's happening in the eternal world of not only mind space, but visceral space, organs and tissues and activities inside our body, ultimately to transcendence and metacognition, where we can observe ourselves having a sensory experience, but also observe ourselves in intentional perceptual experiences and self-observation, which activates our prefrontal cortex, which according to science is the latest product of biological evolution. Of course, I go beyond that, in that prefrontal cortex and brain are, again, mental constructs. They don't actually exist as such, but they're convenient labels to identify what we call neural correlates of experience. But even as we do that, we wake up to fundamental reality. So if you look at some of the ancient wisdom traditions, particularly Vedanta, you'll see that reality is described as different in different states of consciousness. So right now, I presume we are all in the waking state, which is a lucid dream in a vivid now, because it'll be over. As soon as this lecture is over, what we're discussing will be done. It might live on the internet, but that's a different story. The waking state is a lucid dream in a vivid now. If I asked you what happened to your childhood, it's a dream. What happened to your teenage years, it's a dream. What happened to yesterday, it's a dream. What happened this morning, it's a dream. What happens to these words by the time you experience them? They don't exist. So the whole waking state is also a dream. But then there's another dream state we experience at night, which is much vaguer, more ambiguous. And when that settles down, we go into deep sleep. Now, I'm learning from evolutionary biologists that life began, at least the experience of life began, in biological organisms through deep sleep, which then manifested as dreams and then as the waking state. So deep sleep might be our window to what we call soul consciousness. And soul consciousness is what we experience. It's called the fourth state of consciousness in ancient traditions, Turiya, which is transcendence, where we experience ourselves as the witnessing awareness of the other states. And if we abide in that soul consciousness, the experience of the non-changing factor in every changing experience, and if we abide in that, that leads to cosmic consciousness, and that we start to wake up in waking, dreaming, and sleeping, and that ultimately leads to divine consciousness. We experience that same witnessing awareness in every object of experience, and ultimately that merges into unity consciousness, or the knowing that we, as pure consciousness, are differentiating into all modes of knowing, but also all so-called knowers and all things known. And this is called the togetherness of observer, observation, and observed, knower, knowing, and known, seer, seeing, and scenery. Unity consciousness is also then called liberation or freedom from the conditioned mind. And in that state, we are free to recycle and evolve into other states of consciousness, ultimately experiencing ourselves as free and fundamental and prior to all experience, but also present in the midst of all experience. Meta-reality then is that field of pure consciousness prior to all conditioning, a field of infinite possibilities, a field that is formless, without cause, irreducible, infinite and fundamental, and unpredictable, because it is that unpredictability that leads to infinite creativity. If everything is predictable, it's an algorithm, and it's not creative. And that's what we are becoming right now, biological algorithms in the absence of introspection and transcendence and self-awareness. This awareness unfolds through synchronicity, a non-local correlation. It's the source of attention and intention, and it's intrinsically free of its modifications, which means that the awareness of an experience is not the experience. In fact, the experience is a modified form of the awareness itself. This awareness is self-organizing, self-regulating, self-evolving, and rooted in the knowing of what we call I am. And this is not necessarily just Eastern insight or Eastern revelation. In the New Testament, Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. And when Moses asked the burning bush the nature of God, the answer received is, I am that I am. In the Vedic tradition, there's an expression, aham brahmasmi, I am the universe, before I am Deepak or the experience of an iPhone or a computer or whatever else we have constructed as reality. Is there any evidence that what I'm saying could be true? And right now, there are people in the world of science that are looking at the milestones of waking up, including ourselves at the Chopra Foundation. There's a shift in sense of self from me to we to us to universal, a change in emotions from fear, anxiety, hostility, and separation to love, compassion, joy, equanimity, a shift in cognition in that we don't see the world as outside us, we see the world as recycling inside us. There's a phrase in the Bhagavad Gita, Prakratim swam vashtavai vishrajami puna puna. Curving back within myself, I create again and again. I create the experience of mind, body, and universe. I recycle, but I also evolve to higher levels of awareness. So shift in cognition, shift in perception, and that it becomes very clear and lucid, but then we go beyond the perception of the material world to see that it is made of pixels, and then actually the pixels are just consciousness recycling itself. This also causes a shift in memory, and the Vedic expression is, I use memory. I do not allow memories to use me. Allowing memories to use me is called karma, and it's a prison. Using memories is creativity, and that's the goal of existence, to liberate ourselves from karmic bondage. And that leads to insight, intuition, higher vision, creativity, flow, ecstasy, transcendence, and a loss of personal agency from me to we to us to infinity. So I propose to you a new formula, replacing the formula of scientific realism, which is E is equal to mc squared. This would be the formula for creation. 0 is equal to infinity is equal to 1. And finally, knowing that true self leads to the loss of the fear of death, because death and birth are mental constructs, and life is the continuum of both. And birth and death are happening at flashing speeds right now. It's the birth of what we call virtual photons and the death of virtual photons, as determined by the uncertainty principle, which is the creative principle of consciousness. At every moment, birth and death at the speed of light, interpreted in various ways. Birth at the moment of physical birth, or birth at the moment of a fertilized egg, or death at the moment of the absence of the physical body, when in fact anything that's physical is actually a projection of the fundamental, infinite, formless, irreducible, without cause awareness that we really are. So current scientific methodologies are based on the understanding that matter is the ontological primitive of the universe. They're also based on subject-object split and empirical facts as indicative of fundamental reality. But what I'm saying is even empirical facts are species-specific snapshots of experiences interpreted as in human consciousness as facts. There's nothing really factual about them. So at our foundation, we are now looking at new algorithms that include what is called Gödel's theorem, which allows us to go beyond the rationality of even mathematics. Gödel's theorem says that there are theorems in mathematics that can't be proved but are true. So using that and creating new algorithms, correlating brain entrainment with precision genomics, mental health, pain management, bioregulation, stress management, will all, I hope, lead to a new paradigm for well-being at every level of existence, not just physical, emotional, spiritual, but where the spiritual, emotional, spiritual are seen as a unified process in our own being. And when we find that in our own self, that's a journey without distance. That is how the new paradigm will emerge, from self to self. This, I think, could be my final slide. As you know, I've been a practitioner of yoga for as long as I can remember in my adult life. And yoga includes all these things: asanas, which are seats of awareness, breathing practices, meditation, inquiry, dhyan, which is also mode of continuous meditation, dharana, focused awareness, samadhi, which is transcendence. And as we begin to explore the relationship of all these to each other, the ultimate goal is to experience our own lightness of being as fundamental, lighter than the wind, lighter than even space, unimaginable, inconceivable, but that without which there is no imagination, conception, or perception. That is what I wanted to share with you today. And I feel very encouraged that humanity is slowly waking up. If we reach a critical mass of that waking up, then perhaps we can upgrade our collective illusion to a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, and joyful planet. Ultimately, the universe will evolve and continue to evolve into degrees of imagination that we currently may be incapable of even imagining. I'll end with a short quote from my favorite poet, Rumi. When I die, I will soar with the angels, but when I die to the angels, what I shall become, you cannot imagine. So we are right now, we and the universe are the imagination of ourselves. And imagination is the highest attribute of consciousness as it conceives, constructs, governs, and embeds itself into what it has imagined as the universe. Thank you very much.
Deepak, thank you. You took us on a wonderful and a very insightful journey. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Give my fondest regards to Irwin. Tell him I'm a big fan. Sorry I missed him, but we'll be in touch.
Great. All right. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We're going to take a short break, and then we'll come back, and we'll have our two final speakers of the day. Welcome back. Our next speaker is Ghada Chehade. Ghada has a young infant, and so she asked if she could do her presentation as a video recording. Afterwards, hopefully she'll be able to join us for questions and answers. Ghada is an award-winning writer, social critic, and performance poet. She spent over a decade as a political analyst specializing in geopolitics and the study of socio-political change. Her articles and essays have been published in international publications such as the Asia Times, Daily News Egypt, The Political Anthropologist, and The Global Analyst. She recently broadened her focus to include an analysis of how changes in science and cosmology impact the larger culture. Dr. Chehade holds a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's in communication studies and a PhD in discourse analysis from McGill University. Her doctoral research won the award for Best Dissertation from the Canadian Association for the Study of Discourse and Writing and was funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. Ghada is currently writing a book on cosmology and culture. Her essays and videos on the subject are frequently featured on the Thunderbolts Project website and channel. The title of her presentation is The Cultural Impacts of Cosmology and the Paradigm Shift Process.
I'd like to thank Richard Bloom, Irvin Laszlo, and the Laszlo Institute for giving me the opportunity to participate in today's symposium. Today I'm going to be speaking about cosmology's importance and impact beyond the natural and physical sciences, as well as the meaning and making of a paradigm shift. I'm not a cosmologist. I have an interdisciplinary background in the social sciences that combines political science, communication studies, and a doctorate in critical discourse analysis. So why would I, a political scientist and discourse analyst, be interested in cosmology? Well, for starters, cosmology can be described as a type of master discourse and meta-paradigm that contains all other paradigms within it. Fundamentally, cosmology tells the story of what is. What is this thing we call the universe? What is the structure of the universe? What is its driving force? How and why did it develop the way it has? Is it isolated or connected? Is it finite or infinite? Does it have an origin? Does it have an end? I think we can agree that these questions are as much philosophical as they are scientific. And just thinking about the universe will eventually lead to contemplating everything else within it, including our understanding of our man-made world and culture. In this respect, If and when cosmology changes, then conceptually, everything else can also change. And this has happened in various times in history. Which leads me to the first part of today's talk. Cosmology, and more importantly, changes in cosmology, have precipitated tectonic cultural and ideological shifts that have shaped and defined the course of Western history. For instance, let's look at one of the most important cosmological shifts in human history, the shift from an Earth-centric cosmology to a sun-centric cosmology via Galileo and the Copernican revolution. This shift was so profound that it eventually sparked the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, materialism, urbanization, and our mechanistic view of the universe and nature, among many other things. It also helped to unseat the power of the Catholic Church, which was already facing resistance from the Reformation. This new cosmology, which essentially opposed the Church's official view of the heavens, eventually helped to move the West away from theological rule and towards modern-day forms of government and, later on, democracy. In addition, one of the greatest impacts of the shift to this new cosmology was how it impacted our understanding of what it means to be human. It has been noted that Galileo's ideas not only sparked a scientific revolution, they initiated a large-scale revolution in human thinking. He changed the way we see the world, and more importantly, how we perceive ourselves within it. Galileo's defiance of the Church led to what has been described as the most important idea in modern history. The idea that any person, regardless of his or her individual characteristics, can seek and find the truth. So implied in the scientific revolution is the recognition that individuals matter and can think for themselves. Now, while we may take this for granted today, this thinking was revolutionary and blasphemous in Galileo's time, and indeed landed him in deep, deep trouble with the Church. However, while cosmology impacts culture, we have to remember that cosmological shifts are also a product of their time and tend to grow out of and/or reinforce pre-existing philosophical and socio-political settings or interests that can benefit from or exploit ideas promoted and reflected in a new cosmology. For instance, while he was condemned by the Church, Galileo was also backed by certain segments of the aristocracy, as well as the powerful banking family, the Medicis. These entities were great supporters of Renaissance humanism, a philosophy that we know prioritizes and glorifies the potential of the individual and the human mind. Galileo's ideas were reinforced by, and also served to reinforce, Renaissance humanism and art. Artists of Galileo's day responded favorably and enthusiastically to the new ideas that science was making. These discoveries, and the scientific revolution, ultimately affirmed and furthered Renaissance artists' obsession with representing man and nature accurately and realistically. So basically, realism in the arts. Beyond art and philosophy, the scientific revolution helped to bring the fruits of humanism into the realm of politics. Here, it served to help shift ultimate power from the Church to the monarchy. But the monarchy's supremacy was short-lived, as notions of human importance and self-actualization led learned individuals and certain merchant classes to question the absolute dominance of monarchs, in a manner that eventually gave rise to republics and nation-states, including modern-day forms of democracy. So overall, the cultural impacts of the heliocentric view of the cosmos were massive and far-reaching. Occurring over several centuries, these changes in science, technology, governance, and philosophy form the foundations of modern-day Western civilization. The next major paradigm shift in cosmology was that of relativity and the Big Bang. Similar to Galileo, it has been noted that Einstein's impact was so immense that any assessment must range beyond the sciences to take in the various ways he changed culture. Now, this is not a direct result of Einstein or his cosmology. Rather, it is a result of Einstein's theory of relativity being adopted and applied in the non-sciences, especially in the areas of art and philosophy. For instance, in the world of art, Einstein's theory of relativity contributed to the revolutionary departure from representational art and the rise and dominance of abstract art. This is essentially a paradigm shift in the world of art. Most notably, Einstein's theory of relativity contributed to the development of Cubism, a style established by Picasso and his colleagues. In Cubist artwork, objects are analyzed, broken up, and reassembled in an abstracted manner instead of being depicted from one viewpoint. Now, in the world of abstract art, art doesn't have to make sense and is celebrated as such. And this is a stark contrast from the dominance of realistic art in previous eras. While many celebrated Cubist art, some art critics, to this day, condemn it as the death of art, describing it as intentionally meaningless. Now, whatever one's opinion or taste in art, this paradigm shift owes much to the cultural influence of Einstein and the paradigm shift in cosmology. Relativity also had a profound impact on philosophy and human thinking, especially in the form of relativism. Now, relativism as an idea goes back to the ancient world. While it was refuted by philosophers such as Plato, arguments for relativism have existed throughout history. However, it was not until powerful interests had a use for or could benefit from relativism that the concept became widespread. As noted in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, quote, "The popularity of the very idea of relativism in the 20th century owes something to Einstein's special theory of relativity, which was to be used both as model and as well as a vindication for various relativistic claims." End quote. Two examples, I believe, are epistemological relativism and moral relativism. Epistemological or cognitive relativism espouses the idea that there is no absolute truth to be had, since all truth is relative. Similarly, moral relativism holds that morality, meaning right and wrong, good and bad, is also relative and varies from person to person. Prior to relativity, philosophers such as Aristotle, Kant, and Mill argued that there was an absolute truth and an absolute way of approaching various aspects of life, especially with respect to morality and moral obligations. So the truth and morality went from being something that was absolute and out there for all people to arrive at, to something variable with potentially billions of individual truth and ethics. It should be noted that this philosophical position is not typically accepted by the laws and social norms we produce. To this day, the law still relies on the founding premise that humans are capable of reason and knowing right from wrong, and does not operate within the confines of moral relativism. Law notwithstanding, however, postmodern philosophy, which emphasizes pluralism and relativism and rejects any certain belief in absolute value, brought moral relativism into the sociopolitical milieu. Now, it has been noted that Einstein was not a moral relativist and even recoiled at the misappropriation and misapplication of his theory in the non-sciences. For instance, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy states, quote, "Einstein did not think that the theory of relativity supported relativism in ethics or epistemology, because although in his model, simultaneity and sameness of place are relative to reference frames, the physical laws expressing such relativity are constant and universal, and hence, in no sense relative." End quote. If that's the case, then Einstein's theory of relativity, and by extension, contemporary cosmology, may have been misapplied to serve certain interests. For example, in a 2020 article entitled "Think Like Einstein, The Paradox Mindset," the author notes that Einstein was used to conceiving and embracing opposite or contradictory ideas, and also that many Nobel Prize-winning scientists are known to do the same. Describing this as a paradox mindset, the author encourages readers to do likewise, arguing that, quote, "Embracing contradictory ideas is one of the main assets for raising creativity and is a better way forward." The author concludes that paradox is a good thing that ought to be embraced in the workplace. Similarly, in a 2020 BBC article on work culture, the authors argue that once again, the paradox mindset is the key to success in the workplace, stating that, quote, "Although paradoxes often trip us up, embracing contradictory ideas may actually be the secret to creativity and leadership." End quote. And strangely, in a talk at the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States of America, scholars argued that the key to promoting peacemaking and peaceful intervention overseas is paradoxical thinking, which they define as information that is inconsistent with held beliefs and raises the sense of absurdity. Now, I think these examples clearly show that Einstein and his theory of relativity are being used to promote and normalize paradox and contradiction in contemporary culture, and everything from workplace conduct to politics and foreign policy. So given everything we've discussed so far, we can clearly see the profound and far-reaching impacts of cosmology on culture and human thinking. This leads us to the second part of our talk, the paradigm shift process and the present state of cosmology. While contemporary cosmology and its theories are being used to promote paradox and contradiction in the broader culture, according to physicist and philosopher of science Thomas Kuhn, mounting paradox or contradiction in science is actually indications of crisis and impending revolution. The concept of paradigm shift was first formalized by Kuhn in his groundbreaking book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. In that book, Kuhn challenged the common conception of science as a steady progression of the accumulation of new ideas. Looking at the history of scientific advancement, Kuhn argued instead that science advanced the most by occasional revolutionary explosions of new knowledge, each revolution triggered by the introduction of new ways of thought so large and so different they must be called new paradigms. But how exactly does this happen? For Kuhn, a paradigm shift is a process, and it has distinct stages. These stages are pre-science, a pre-stage where the field or discipline has no workable paradigm to successfully guide its work. Then there is normal science. This is the normal step, where the field has a scientifically based model of understanding that works. Then we have model drift. Here, the model of understanding, or the normal science, starts to drift due to the accumulation of anomalies and contradictions that the model cannot explain. Then comes model crisis. At this stage, the model drift, meaning the anomalies and contradictions, becomes so excessive that the model is broken and can no longer guide the field. It is a crisis because decisions can no longer be made rationally. At this stage, attempts to patch the model up and make it work fail, and the field is essentially in anguish. After model crisis comes model revolution. This begins when serious candidates for a new model emerge. It's a revolution because the new model is so radically different from the old. Finally, we arrive at paradigm change. A single new paradigm emerges, and the field changes from the old to the new paradigm. When this step ends, the new paradigm becomes the new normal science, and the Kuhn cycle is complete. So, where does cosmology find itself today? Currently, the biggest topic in debate in cosmology seems to be cosmology itself. Everywhere you look, someone is talking about a crisis in cosmology. As physicist Eric Lerner has shown, in 1995, there was one media reference every year to the crisis in cosmology. By the beginning of the 2000s, it had gone up to 5 references per year, and then 12 references by the mid-2000s. By the latter part of the present decade, it was approximately 24 references per year. And then, in 2019, it shot up to 130 references per year. This is a drastic increase in just 2 years, and the trend is continuing. Popular mainstream science and non-science magazines and websites are full of headlines suggesting that cosmology is presently in deep trouble. Some examples include Cosmology is in crisis over how to measure the universe, Wired magazine. The crisis in cosmology, PBS Spacetime. The new crisis in cosmology, PBS Spacetime again. Could the Big Bang be wrong? Discover magazine. Is it time to dethrone the Big Bang theory? Forbes. And is the Big Bang in crisis? Astronomy.com. Now, I could go on and on. There are hundreds more, but I think you get the picture. The takeaway is that there's a growing general awareness, both in the field and in the popular media, of a problem and crisis in standard cosmology. Given the present discourse and scientists' own words, I believe we are currently in the model crisis stage of the Kuhn paradigm shift cycle. The titles I listed deal with one or more of the following as it relates to the Big Bang or standard cosmology. Anomaly, meaning something that deviates from what is standard, normal, or accepted, and or contradiction, meaning new measurements, observations, or findings that undermine, contradict, or oppose the major principles and assumptions of standard cosmology in some way. Now, let us remember that in Thomas Kuhn's cycle, when there are a few anomalies and contradictions, then the dominant model or normal science is said to be in a state of drift. But when too many anomalies and contradictions accumulate, which the model cannot adequately explain or fix, then the model is said to be in a state of crisis. And for Kuhn, crisis means that the model is broken and can no longer guide the field. Curiously, however, despite their alarmist titles, most of the articles and videos listed fail to address whether or not the current model is broken, with many even doubling down on it, or, interestingly, blaming the failure of Big Bang cosmology on the so-called increasingly weird and wacky, strange universe. So one would think that having to blame the universe for the failure of one's theory would be a red flag to re-examine at least some of the underlying assumptions of that theory, but that has not been the case. This is not surprising, however, given what Kuhn suggests about dominant or normal science. Kuhn argued that normal science is institutionalized, and therefore functions much like other dominant institutions, such as religion or politics, in that it is essentially dogmatic, hegemonic, and resistant to change. So under this understanding of science, resisting innovation, doubling down on a broken model, or blaming the model's failures on the weirdness of the universe are all further symptoms of a model in crisis. Which brings us to the final part of today's talk. In the Kuhn paradigm shift cycle, model crisis gives way to model revolution. So while standard cosmology is in crisis, it is also inevitably heading towards revolution. For Kuhn, model revolution begins when serious candidates for a new model emerge that are fundamentally different from the existing model. As he explains, the new and existing models speak entirely different languages, making them irreconcilable and incompatible. This is what makes it a revolution in the first place. To give an analogous example of this, let's consider the paradigm shift in art that we discussed earlier. In comparing abstract or cubist art to realist art, we can clearly see that they speak completely different languages and are totally irreconcilable and incompatible. For instance, it's difficult to conceive of the Mona Lisa and Picasso's Weeping Woman sharing the same canvas. Returning to Kuhn and his model. Overall, the main criteria for model revolution is the emergence of a new model that is fundamentally different. And with respect to paradigm change, which is Kuhn's final stage, the new paradigm must also be simpler and completely supplant the previous model. I believe this goes against the reality of the ever-increasing complexity in contemporary cosmology. Now, I'll leave it to the physical and natural scientists to debate this point, but even a cursory look at standard cosmology over the last 20 or 30 years shows that it is becoming progressively more complex and more contradictory. Moreover, in contrast to Kuhn's requirement for fundamental difference, adherents of the standard model admit that present-day alternatives are actually more like add-ons and extensions to the standard model since they, quote, typically modify some of the main features but do not reject the Big Bang, end quote. But superficial alternatives that retain the language or tenets of the Big Bang are not different enough to be part of an emerging cosmological revolution. Overall, Kuhn's criteria for model revolution and paradigm change ultimately fly in the face of claims made by Big Bang scientists, such as, quote, we can be quite confident that wherever future theories and discoveries take us, the Big Bang will be part of the picture, end quote. On the contrary, according to the very definition of paradigm shift and what it means to have a revolution in science, the new cosmology categorically cannot and therefore will not be a Big Bang 2.0. Simply put, the standard model and any add-ons or extensions to it can play no part in the future paradigm in cosmology. In closing, it appears that cosmology is in the midst of a revolutionary crisis. The standard model is broken and dying and appears to be on its way out. By Big Bang scientists' own admission, the model is plagued with mounting inconsistencies and is an undeniable crisis. Thomas Kuhn has shown us that we cannot look to broken paradigms to guide us. This means that a truly alternative cosmology is the only way forward. Given that reality, it is indeed a very interesting time to be alive. Historically, science and philosophy have been engaged in a dance with the mysteries of the cosmos, sometimes moving us forward, other times moving us farther away. A new cosmology, emerging in a new time, allows us to once again ask the quintessential questions of the universe and philosophy. What is this thing we call the universe? What is its structure? What is its driving force? And so on and so on. The answers to these and other questions, conceived through a fundamentally different cosmology, speaking a fundamentally different language, will hopefully help bring us closer to better understanding the universe and our place within it. According to Kuhn, this presents us with an opportunity to conceive an entirely new world. To quote Kuhn at length, that the world does not change with a change of paradigm. The scientist afterward works in a different world. Rather than being an interpreter, the scientist who embraces a new paradigm is like the man wearing inverting lenses, confronting the same constellation of objects as before, and knowing that he does so, he nevertheless finds them transformed through and through. Now, given cosmology's profound cultural impacts and all the ways in which cosmological paradigm shifts have shaped and defined the course of history, this is also true beyond science. For instance, the shift to relativity and Big Bang contributed to a major paradigm shift in the world of art. Now, while the world did not change with the shift to Cubism and modern art, the artist afterward was working and creating in an entirely different world. What's more, the world of the art viewer or audience also fundamentally changed. Before abstraction, representational art had an intended subject and/or meaning and a primary interpretation that most people could or would agree on. But with abstract and cubist art, the art experience becomes subjective and open to multiple interpretations. The change to a new art forever changed the experience of the art audience, and henceforth, modern art was to be experienced in a relativist fashion. This drastically altered the experience of viewing and interacting with art, and essentially changed the world of art for both the artist and the audience. The same is true of the paradigm shift in power, which was aided by the shift from a geocentric to a heliocentric view of the cosmos. Before that cosmological shift, the Catholic Church was still the dominant political power in Europe. But Galileo's heresy was the fatal blow to its dominance, and the world of theocracy was forever altered and eventually ceased to exist in the West. Moreover, as stated in the first part of our discussion, one of the biggest impacts of past cosmological paradigm shifts was the way they changed how we perceive the world and our place within it. Galileo and the scientific revolution led to the idea that individuals matter and can seek and find the truth, with a capital T, while the application of relativity to philosophy led to relativism and the idea that there is no absolute truth, since all truth is relative. Now, these worldviews are so different and so incompatible that it can be said that any two individuals who live in the same era but do not agree on the nature of truth, meaning if it is relative or absolute, will essentially be living in two different worlds. Overall, given that our subject is cosmology, the all-encompassing meta-paradigm, and given the profound cultural and ideological impacts and changes that eventually result from changes in cosmology, we can be quite certain that when the cosmological paradigm changes again, it will transform not only the scientific world, but once again, the worlds of art, philosophy, technology, spirituality, etc. And the time is approaching. We are on the cusp of a revolution in cosmology. The new paradigm will impact all of humanity, ultimately transforming our understanding of our world and what it means to be human. Thank you.
Well, I think many of us found that very insightful, particularly relevant, given that the focus of our conference and the Institute is on paradigm shift. And I think her historical analysis was quite revealing to the process and the influence that cosmology has on our culture and society. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
How's the little one doing?
I may be past a crying baby at any moment. I'm on maternity leave.
Great. I found it very insightful. I'm sure many of us did. So let's see now. Questions. Alexander, if you want to join in, feel free. There's one from Donna Harris. Donna, can you unmute yourself?
Hi. Say, that was a great reframing of paradigm and application to different areas than we usually think of. I was just wondering if you had any any predictions as to the nature of the revolution and the outcomes or directions that it might be going.
Well, I'm not a scientist, and that's why I refrained from giving my maybe opinion on the new cosmology. But I can tell you that using the Kuhn framework, I do personally, I'm drawn to a model called the electric universe model, mainly because if you were to do a little bit of reading on it, again, I can't debate the science and what scientifically will prevail. But if you look at the Kuhn framework and his criteria for model revolution, as I said in the recorded talk, it is, first of all, primarily the emergence of a model that's fundamentally different and speaks a completely different language. There are a lot of alternatives out there that are very interesting, very compelling, but when you scratch beneath the surface, they have to be classified, if we use Kuhn, as these add-ons and extensions. And they're still, while very interesting and fascinating, they're still working within the existing model. So that could be a reform or a revision, an alteration, an extension. But if we're talking about a paradigm, a new paradigm, which is the topic of today's symposium, then we have to be talking about paradigm shifts. And that's where Kuhn comes in. And he's given us very beautifully, I think, a formula that you can almost just kind of put, against the backdrop, and you don't have to be a natural physical scientist. So I don't want to push my own view too much on the audience. One that I would recommend people reading is the electric universe model. I am going to be discussing it in my upcoming work. Scientifically, I'll leave that to the scientists, natural and physical sciences, to debate. But if you look at the Kuhn framework, it is a fundamentally different language. The standard model speaks the language of gravity and relativity, whereas the electric universe model speaks the language of electromagnetism, which is a force that's actually billions of times stronger than gravity. At the same time, it speaks the language of connectivity, which some would say is opposite of relativity. So it's a very, very fundamentally different. Whether or not it will prevail, I don't know. I can't say scientifically, I'm not qualified to. But I really recommend that everyone here look into the electric universe model. It's one that appeals to me personally.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ghada, I have a question.
Sure.
The transition to general relativity did not make Newton incorrect, but it made it more accurate, right? So Newton's theories are actually accurate enough that they're the ones that NASA use when we send satellites to planets like Mars or Jupiter. But general relativity is more exact and gives us a whole new framework for understanding time and space. Is it likely that the Big Bang Theory also would not necessarily be completely thrown out, but would be modified the way that Einstein came up with a new framework, but then the old framework of Newton still was relevant and still accurate, but coarser?
Definitely, and it's still taught in schools. I believe we still teach Newtonian mechanics in high school and grade school.
Right.
I think what would potentially happen, you're definitely right. Einstein was an add-on, an extension, an improvement of Newton that still spoke the same language. They're speaking the language of gravity. So I don't know that it's an altogether new paradigm. I do believe that the existing standard model is so institutionalized, so entrenched, that it's almost too big to fail. There's billions and billions of dollars in funding at stake and careers and an entire legacy there. So I don't think that we're going to see in our lifetime that model really be supplanted. What may occur are additions and extensions that improve upon the present model, alongside the emergence of completely new models that then become not new paradigms, but almost parallel streams or alternative paradigms. Because I do think that Big Bang standard cosmology, because I know it's not just Bang, it's Big Bang, relativity, lambda, I'm not sure of the name, but I know it has a name, lambda something. That model is so entrenched and so present that it's going to take a long time and almost a critical mass of scientists working within the model to really recognize that there's a problem. For many people, there isn't a problem with that model, no reason to replace it. So I do think things will come along to improve upon that model.
But again, that won't be a new paradigm, not in the Kuhnian sense. Others will call it a new paradigm for sure. But I think there will be the emergence of what I call an alternative paradigm. And so you'll have paradigms existing in parallel streams. And given the information age, people will be able to access that other paradigm. It won't be taught in schools or in textbooks. Maybe in centuries it will. But right now we live in this very, very interesting time because we have the information age, we have the internet, we have alternative media and alternative websites. So there may be new models that emerge and have to kind of function in the margins. And that's not to say that the Big Bang can't continue in its own light and its own manner. And I'm sure it will for centuries. I don't think this will happen in my lifetime or my son's.
Well, if it's not going to happen in yours, it won't happen in mine. That's for sure. We'll see if anyone else has questions, but I'll just want to piggyback on something you just said, which is that what we have with the standard model and physics today is too large to fail. There's so much money and everything put into it that for cosmologists or people developing new cosmologies, including myself, it would be very hard to get recognized, and particularly if you're not even a physicist like myself.
Can I jump in and say something on
Yeah,
that?
sure.
Well, the beauty, I think, again, of the electric universe model, which I don't go into in my presentation, is that it's actually an interdisciplinary model. And there's people from all walks of life. I'm not a physicist. There's people from all walks of life who are doing work in that area. It prides itself on being self-consciously interdisciplinary. I think that's one of the reasons it also won't get recognized or funding, not by the mainstream. So again, there may be an alliance of alternative models that come together in an interdisciplinary fashion. And I think when you're dealing with a subject as big as cosmology, I mean, this is the ultimate topic. It's the universe. Specialization, I think, maybe has hurt the field. And I think as we move forward, we're going to see almost a need for this field to open up to interdisciplinary approaches. Approaches such as your own, and I'm sure many things that we're going to hear at the symposium. And again, it might be parallel streams.
I don't want to monopolize it here, but I would just say that the other big question facing scientists today, and what we heard from also today, is how the nature of consciousness, its relationship to the brain. And in my opinion, it seems that answering the cosmological question also leads to answering the question regarding consciousness and vice versa. And so it is a multidisciplinary approach to the next paradigm. So there's a question from, is that Anna and Gary? Let me unmute you.
My father went to McGill, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Graduate. I wanted to say that, do you feel that this idea of going from, Mayor Baba talks about going from reason, the age of reason, to intuition, that we would all be very much involved with our intuition and our ability to feel with our, having a knowingness, having a sense of knowingness. And actually the Aboriginals and other indigenous people have this ability to just, there's no false, because they can all read each other's minds. It's this type of thing. Intuition would involve being able to be at one in a real essential sense with one another. And I'm wondering if that could possibly be a part of the new paradigm, that this age really does go from reason to intuition.
I believe that it most certainly can. And I think we're headed in that and multiple other very necessary directions. Part of the new model that I talk about, and again, it's not my model, but it's a model that I'm drawn to. I'll talk about that and then I'll give you a little personal anecdote maybe, is this idea of cosmic connectivity, that everything in the cosmos is connected. It's just a matter of scalability. So from the most galactic to the tiniest, most infinitesimal, everything is connected. And if everything is connected, then perhaps via electric currents, perhaps via ether, I'm not sure what the fill in the blank is there, then there would be a type of, I don't know if I want to say a pathway or a channel, but things that maybe naturally exist that we're not super aware of. And when I say we, I say the West. I'm personally raised in the West, but I come from Egypt. It's an ancient culture. And in that culture, it's very, very normal. It's a normal part of the lexicon to talk about things like your inner knowing, or your higher or deeper knowing. Those things aren't considered so weird because it's so ancient that it was before reason kind of, made the world and the universe so mechanistic and so materialistic that we lost that part. And so I think I can't say that's the way it will go. we live in a corporate globalized world. If there's profit for it, it might become mainstreamed. It doesn't mean people won't naturally be drawn to that. It doesn't mean. Yeah.
Reason seems to have been, it sort of usurped authority from intuition, because intuition and this knowingness was there for ancient times, ages. And then this age of reason came in, and then it seemed to wipe it out, So what I'm saying is, if it might not be, it's an ancient paradigm, actually, that we could actually go into the circle of, rather than create something entirely new. Something quite ancient could actually be very, very viable at this stage.
Well, again, I don't want to keep plugging the electric universe model, but if you do read up on it, the basis of that model is ancient mythology. They came to their cosmology via ancient mythology. So I believe it's a cosmology that's not just interdisciplinary, but builds bridges, because it draws on the ancient past, but also builds bridges to the future. So I do recommend, I find it very compelling, and I recommend that everyone here read up on it. Now, the spiritual component, I think definitely we're going to open doors, and have to open doors, because as Rupert Sheldrake has noted, I think in a talk recently on consciousness, is the universe conscious? He discussed how every civilization took it for granted that the universe was conscious up until the Age of Reason. And this included Plato and Aristotle and great philosophers that we all know and respect. So it maybe is a hearkening back, or a remembering, or a reconnecting. So I think it's a very exciting time to be alive. It's all possible.
Indeed. I'm going to thank you, Ghada, very much for coming here. And I know we have other questions, but unfortunately, we have another speaker, and then we're going to have breakout rooms later.
Thank you for having me.
So hopefully we'll see you tomorrow in the
panel
discussion. And thank you very much.
Thank you
for being here. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
So we're going to move on to our next speaker. His name is Adrian Klein, and he has submitted a video for us. And we're going to watch that, and then he'll be available for questions and answers. He's a lifelong researcher of a post-materialistic approach to conscious studies. He has a PhD in cognitive neuropsychology and a PhD in metaphysical sciences, a pioneer of subquantum physics as related to sentience, and the author of papers and books on this theme, as well as being an international lecturer. His talk is entitled "A Hyperdimensional, Information-Driven, and Subquantum-Inspired Cosmology." Hi, Adrian. Good to see you.
I'm here, and I'm ready to start my presentation, if you want.
Okay, do you want us to run the video, or do you want to do it from where you are?
No. You will broadcast it from your center.
Yes. Okay. So Izzy, yes, we'll do that, and then we'll come back to you for questions and answers.
Yes, of course.
Okay, just to say, Dr. Klein is over in Israel. Okay, take it away.
Deeply respected and highly distinguished colleagues, please kindly do me the favor of accepting my following short presentation of some conceptual horizons that might fit into our symposium's thematical guidelines in a pre-recorder PowerPoint display. I've decided for this option in order to reach a better clarity of expressions, as well as an increased narrative fluency while obeying our strict time limit allocations. Let's start with a short introduction of our quite specific cosmological concept. It can't be overemphasized that we sharply deviate from the classical cosmology, which addresses the physical universe just as a space-time embedded construct. Our concept, proposed back in 1990 and recently published in Bucharest 2019, introduced, probably for the first time, a third megacoordinate to the Minkowski diagram, extending it into an all-comprehensive frame of reference by adding information as a genuine, fundamental ontological prime. Our cosmology describes space-time as a limited and derivative structure, embedded in, and guided by an infinite information pool, which is organized in semantic fields of increasing complexity, reaching up to the source, which is the Wildman's and Mills, so-called demiurgic field. This is the proto-active essence, in this diagram marked as D0 infinite connection point to the source, the overarching cosmic harmony. In terms of modern physics, this is the domain where fractal chaos, as the negotropic source of the emergent ground state of the universe, resides. It is the fundamental intentionality, acting upon the quasi-chaotic excitability supplied by lower levels of transactional mediators, down to our perceivable quantum fluctuations at the matter-energy level of manifestation. As we shall see later on, this connectivity is implemented by massless virtual units, propagating in non-local regimes with faster-than-light velocities, thus allowing instant interconnectivity of information fields at any level of the cosmic holographic notogram. They gain mass by interfering with Higgs fields and thus displaying a velocity propagation drop in Planck range, where quantum and relativistic constraints do apply. In this process, they conserve their information content, further on injected into matter-energy defined configurations. Obviously, our cosmology emphatically rejects any time-related Big Bang-like assumptions. Creation of our material universe, as seen from our entropic timeline, is a continuous process without any beginning and without an end. It runs in higher time dimensions, projected into our timeline through the cosmic zero-point energy interface, guiding and modulating at this level events that are predetermined in higher-order organizational schemes which originate in Bohm's implicate order of informational essence. Conceiving the three megadimensions, space, time and consciousness, of our hyperdimensional frame of reference as triadic structures, they are connected to the source field by their secondary aspect, while at the same time projecting into physical manifestation their third aspect, in superposition with other dimensionally isotropic components. Our continuously created material universe is periodically recycled at the zero-point conversion of a black hole-like position into its complementary white hole position, a transition point where all the previously structured information gets copied into the form of a starting point for the new material universe, in course of creation. This is the true Big Bang instance in our cosmology, a singularity in pre-spacetime domain. This crucial observation makes of any speculations about before or after the Big Bang mere absurd intellectual constructs. Let's see by now what is probably the most important consequence of the hyperdimensional concept for our space-time dynamics. Our linear timeline as a derivate subdimension of the triadic time block accommodates projections originated in higher time subdimensions. Every instance in our timeline is orthogonally injected into eternity, along the same vector that is followed by superimplicated orders of informational content in order to manifest at predetermined positions on our timeline. This dynamic pattern that runs in non-local, pre-spacetime regime, imprints upon our timeline a symmetric pattern, allowing for retrocausation determinants, as a dominant mechanism of causality. Future predetermined attractors are continuously triggering sequential chains of events in their past, in order to ensure their most suitable patterning for implementing at the right spot in our timeline, their fulfillment. Time symmetry in our physical world is broken by cosmic imbalance between coherent quantum transmitters and cosmic critical temperatures. Nevertheless, a consciousness-induced restoration occurs as a corrective effect at the classical point of break in the time symmetry, the collapse of the probability function. This results in a time-reversed induction of information upon affected structures. At the level of consciousness dynamics, a retarded and an advanced wave functions are evolving time symmetrically around the moment of conscious experience, and not the one of exposure to the stimulus, as experimentally proved by Biermann's work. Time symmetry may be restored in certain conditions, as in the presence of consciousness-bearing structures, where an increased concentration of Einstein Bose condensates build up, proportional to a global coherence index displayed by correlated brain activations. Please note that as a result of determinations performed at different points in positive and negative time as referred to as stimulus onset, a time-advanced symmetrical wave is formed like a mirror image of the observable advanced equivalent after the instance moment of the stimulus. As expected, conscious perception is delayed by slow neural transmission. The mirror image is reflecting the later bump as preceding the earlier one upon the negative time scale involved. This mechanism may be at the background of blurred premonition instances of upcoming events, amply discussed in the parapsychological literature. At a more fundamental level, it describes retrocausation effects as induced by informational attractor presets from future predetermined constellations. In long run, quantum predicted distributions are disturbed by mental hidden variables at work. Rebalancing effects for such disturbances yield new disturbances in higher order distribution patterns. Please note that advanced wave functions in negative time correspond only to actual future actualization variants, rather than probabilistic ones. The reversal of the second law of thermodynamics in the quantum processes here addressed by the time reversal vector leads to an entropy decay in the otherwise random systems, in accordance to our total entropy conservation postulate. Such dynamics are conceivable only in the framework of a hyperdimensional cosmology of the kind we defend, where observable events are evolving along predeterministic vectors that originate in higher modulating information fields. But let's now take a closer look on the very nature of information as ontological prime, and its connection mechanism to space-time defined matter-energy configurations. We are addressing only true, eidetic variants of information, which are essentially non-computable structures displaying specific properties that render them to be accessible and processable in qualia regimes. Since the publication of Nobel Prize-winning fractional quantum Hall effect back in 1998 by Stormer et al., which opened the door toward an infinite divisibility of quanta far beyond the Planck limit and even the Kolmogorov scale, down to infinitesimal subquantum units that correspond to the Vedic term of Bathatmas, a new era in scientific inquiry has been started. Please follow this short infogram depicting the interdimensional downwardly opened resolution scheme to infinitesimal subquantum regimes through the Laughlin wave function that allows for fractional charge excitations in the quantum field. We are placing our cosmologic concepts in a subquantum plenum field with superfluidic properties, where subquantum units and combinatorials are able to store and transport information at superluminal velocities which reached out to infinite values not prohibited by relativistic constraints, which naturally do no way apply in non-local regimes. They are embedded in a cosmic holographic quantum information pool, which can be traced back to the cosmological prime radiation matrix. Here you can follow energy and information as negative covariant functions of subquantum velocity values. We postulate that the interdimensional connection of information to space-time defined domains takes place at the level of subquantum units, and thus we define these infinitesimal as smallest units of the space, time and consciousness triad. The information content thus injected in subquantum structures evolves along a vector of increasing complexity paralleled by velocity drops inside the space-time configurations, where they, of course, obey classical physical limitations. It must be especially emphasized that all the conceivable variants of biological and non-biological life forms, the non-material ones included, are products of the aforementioned increase in information complexity gradients, and no way they're originating sources, as wrongly suggested by current conventional materialistic paradigms. Lifelike properties. Life becomes related rather to coherent solidon-like organizations of information carrier subquantum entities, organized in ether flux variants, and not a mere chance byproduct of self-organization events currently described in conventional evolutionary schemes of the Darwinian and post-Darwinian kind, in terms of random chemical interactions. R contends restore a subquantum-mediated morphogenetic approach as patterning instance for cell differentiation templates, upon which multispectral energy structures are built. Translating relevant ancestral initiation teachings into modern scientific terms, though we refer our colleagues that might possibly be interested in deepening this issue to the recent research works published by Professor Cronin and his team about experimental synthesis of non-biological life forms based on inorganic molecules of iron oxide instead of the carbon-based configurations, and displaying intrinsically multidimensional subquantum structures are able to progressively aggregate into morphogenetic grids, displaying triphasic scalar wave interconnectedness. The information content of such structures is injected into matter-energy defined configurations from non-local regimes by subquantum-controlled subtle energy fields, transgressing the zero-point energy interdimensional barrier in order to reach their implementation modalities in our observable world of classical, relativistic and quantum effectors. Our subquantum-inspired cosmological proposal turns upside down obsolete materialist paradigmatic dogmas, which are still preached at academic information dissemination spots mainly for tenure considerations. Let's hope that the highest scientific credential-bearing authorities attending this symposium will join our efforts for replacing in a most credible way the old obsolete worldviews by the new postmaterialistic concepts they sincerely defend. By now, with the background of our cosmological assumptions in place, we may attempt to explore the way they apply in the still quite elusive domain of consciousness in its brain-coupled variant of manifestation. The morphogenetic patterning of brain is performed according to its complex intended functional requirements as a multidimensional information processing apparatus, working with highly specialized neuronal cells that display as none of the other cytological units, a fractally shaped contour. Fractal geometry analysis has put in evidence a 4/5 allometric scaling law that results in a fractal distribution of subquantum structures across distribution orders that are far beyond their own structural codes. A fifth-dimensional function is present in resonant neural network connectivity schemes which govern a sequentially increasing electroencephalographic attractor index, of the kind the compelling clinical experimentations performed by Walling and Hicks' team put in evidence successive phase transitions, which lead a subject from his unconscious deep narcosis state corresponding to a flattened isoelectric electroencephalographic display, all the way up to the recovery of full consciousness marked by a chaotic attractor. As a matter of fact, we may follow here the monitoring of the progressive nonlinear coupling process of non-local consciousness fields to brain's quantum activity, resulting in full activation of environmental integrative awareness modalities as they are ascribed to a brain-related modus operandi of consciousness. In order to make sense of the subquantum brain-mediated perception mechanism, a diagrammatic representation of time-symmetric processes running in both quantum and subquantum regimes may be efficiently helpful. An objective predetermined quantum event becomes spectrally decomposed in subquantum informational units, which are retro-projected in time and perceived as unconscious time-symmetric representations of the future configuration in negative time if related to its conscious perception instance. This manifests in the form of a fuzzy precognition aspect. As a consequence, the conscious self initiates a multimodal attractive coherence mapped by global activation mechanisms on the brain, reacting selectively on external sensory inputs by an attractor resonant effect. The subquantum spectral decomposition of the event's multiple components into information-controlled flux vectors allow for their aligning along a main information vector that impacts running quantum processes, predeterministically compelling them to recruit widely distributed neural areas into a shared collective action template, according to the specific requirements of the particular task implied. The result of this highly complex process is projected subquantally into the self, as the accurate version of the originally fuzzy representation in precognitive range, obeying a delay index due to the slow neural processing efficiency. The instance of the conscious brain perception of the event, as hampered by various decoherent statistical operators involved, corresponds at quantum mechanical level to the collapse of the probability function at the precise predeterminate point of the entire process. This action scheme is strongly supporting retrocausation tenets as amply explained in Kramer's transactional interpretation of quantum physical laws, applied to subquantum integration mechanisms running at the mind-brain hyperdimensional interface. Let's complete our short presentation by some exciting conclusive remarks, addressing the highly elusive topic of the immortal self's survival of physical death, and its cyclical world line of repeated immersion into the domain of matter-energy. The time allocated for this presentation does not allow for even a very short hint of the enormous complexity implied by its tenets in the parapsychological domains of exploration. Vastly more specific mechanisms for the subtle information dynamics operating in the range of the so-called paranormal phenomenology are amply detailed in my books available at the Amazon platform. Most important to be emphasized here is that in our cosmology there is absolutely no epistemological demarcation between normal and paranormal events. Both categories pertain and obey identical phenomenological backgrounds, adding up to the framework of a major, unified theory of cosmic dynamics. Nevertheless, we'll try to briefly pinpoint here some fundamental subquantum principles, which are relevant for the survival hypothesis of the conscious self, as well as its cyclic immersion into the space-time controlled matter-energy domain. We will also enlist a few compelling proofs supplied by the latest scientific evidence for this concept. We support our understandings both by well-known initiate knowledge transferred across generations from traditional Oriental esoteric teachings and checked by personal experience of credible theosophic sources, as well as by undeniable results obtained by masters of this knowledge in their medical practice. Modern scientific explorations confirmed, for example, the polarized toroidal subatomic subtle energy structures known in Chinese traditional medicine as Anu. They correspond to the Compton radius vortex. Subtle energy flux variants operating in the ether are transducers of informational charges between the non-local, pre-spacetime domains and our quantum-based energetic world. Highly complex information carriers' subtle energy forms are able to transgress the zero-point energy interdimensional barrier, thus coupling to and inducing deviations in the quantum potential. This process runs by way of biophotonic and graviphotonic interactions. This applies also to enormously high complexity informational structures of the kind related to storage abilities ascribed to self-conscious entities. In the lower spectra of such complexities are formed and transferred early information-guided embryogenetic fields. They are patterning by quantum genetic correlations time-symmetric gene transcription events. This way, an extension of parental genetic heritage is accomplished into a trigenomic structure, including the so-called soul genome that is supplied into the genetic mixture by the re-embodied entity. This effect is triggered by biophotonic mechanisms supplied at the instance of the ovul's fertilization, observed in advanced biolabs, and described as biochemically triggered spectacular zinc spark outbursts. This increase in genetic complexity results in a second layer of DNA information storage put recently in evidence in secondary DNA folding patterns that provide purposeful guiding and control development tracks for the protein patterning vectors issued by the parental genetic biochemistry. This way, multiplexed informational pathways are created for fulfilling the quantum entanglement of the reincarnating self, using photonic attractor signals that are provided via zero-point energy tunneling effects for the further phases of zygotal and embryogenic development. Dear and highly esteemed colleagues, here ends our compressed presentation of a highly complex postmaterialistic concept as a promising scientific background for the new cosmology we address in this symposium. Starting from some fundamental basics of hyperdimensionality, time symmetry, and subquantum physics, we explored the brain-mind interface and provided a strong case for mind's ability of surviving its disconnection from its temporary physical vehicle in order to re-immerse itself into our tangible world for an informatically recycling evolution purpose. In an attempt to help our friends that might be less familiar with the scientific language mostly used across this presentation, please allow me to summarize its content at a somewhat more easily accessible level. Following the symposium's general guidelines and the various thematic aspects proposed for its different sessions, our intent has been to address most of them, in a single presentation, in the framework of its time limit, under a synoptic label of a new postmaterialistic cosmology. Inspired by Dr. Chris H. Hardy's brilliant understandings of a new cosmogonic model, we brought it into our own general cosmological scheme, rejecting once and for all the obsolete and failed concept of the Big Bang Theory. Installing information in its proper position of a scale-insensitive general guiding and controlling instance of the cosmic dynamics at all levels of its manifestation, we showed the ways this control may be implemented across all of the giant holographic regimes of the universe. And all this is strongly supported by late scientific evidence. Information-bearing structures have been compellingly shown as able to restore time symmetry at its breaking points, thus supplying a normal explanatory option for a wide range of phenomena hitherto wrongly labeled as paranormal, and therefore excluded as eligible candidates for scientific scrutiny by the mainstream materialistic worldview. We briefly touched upon the essence of life as a matter of information complexity rather than one of the mere chemical interactions, extending its meaning upon all forms of life, biological or not, material or not. Further on, we applied our new understandings on the still elusive topic of brain-mind interface and interactions, compellingly proving that brain is not the source of consciousness but its mere conversion tool into structures that may integrate the conscious self during its brain-coupled modus operandi into its ambient material conditions. This conversion is made possible by the specific morphologic configuration displayed by neural cells, which allow for their individual and collective integration into higher dimensional processes. The self, conceived as an extremely high complexity cluster of informational essence, is proved to not depend on the presence of a brain to which it is periodically coupled. As a consequence, its cognitive functions are integrally preserved after its disconnection from the brain's quantum support. These preserved cognitive functions are continuously improved and enriched during its cyclic immersion into our matter-energy controlled domain of manifestation, which supplies its own specific experiential patterns for this purpose. This mechanism is itself a holographic representation of the identical one, which, as described in this presentation, explains the periodic renewal of our whole universe, evolving along a superarching induction vector imprinted from the level of the cosmic harmony. All this said, we hope to provide the young generation of scientists with a possibly rewarding exploration pathway, leading them toward an essentially new paradigmatic and cosmological shift of postmaterialistic orientation, on which all of us participating in this important cultural event are working right now to build up the credible, fundamental milestones. Hoping that this hyper-compressed presentation could be followed in its entirety, I will try in the next 5 minutes to answer some pertinent questions that might have been arise. Thanks for your patience.
Well, thank you. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. All right, so we did have one question from the chat. Are you familiar with Dr. Rick Hansen and Dr. Dan Siegel? And if so, what's your evaluation opinion of their theories?
No, I'm not familiar with their theories. No.
Okay. I do want to say that after this, we're going to have a short break, and then we're going to have the breakout rooms. And in the breakout rooms, that's where we'll gather in small groups, and we can share our ideas and experiences. We have one particular topic for this one. Before we do, are there any other questions for Dr. Klein?
There's a question in the chat from Cynthia. What was your reference to Blavatsky, Madame Blavatsky? You had it quickly on the screen there. I think the question was, how is your work related to her?
Madame Blavatsky?
Yes.
No, this was only a small reference to the long way our concept went through, was transferred by generations, culminating in the theosophical literature that recognizes without any doubt the primacy of the information and of consciousness on matter and on energy. And we are defending the same general perspective, yes, because this is known already from all this long initiatic pathway from the very beginning, that we don't know where is this beginning, paleo-ancestral knowledge brought from abroad or from another source. Anyway, this is the pathway that this specific knowledge and perspective went through from the very beginning till our scientific scrutiny able to express these precepts in modern scientific language. This was my reference to Madame Blavatsky and to the theosophic literature and the theosophic knowledge, wisdom, because we are perfectly aligned with the ancient theosophical wisdom that reached us, and as I've showed here, an anu of the theosophical concept is now the quantum radius vortex, and we have the physical and mathematical description of these subtle energy structures and units. So this is the background of our concept, which is feeding from very, very ancient roots of knowledge, of human wisdom. But only by now we are able to start to begin to express them in modern scientific language, still not generally recognized and accepted, unfortunately, by the mainstream scientific community. But this is why we are here, all of us, to show this mainstream scientific community a new way, a new paradigmatic way to see the reality as it is and not as it has been depicted during the past 50, 100 years, erroneously.
So let's take another question, Adrian. John Reed has his hand up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can.
Good. I'm a technologist, and I look when I hear you talking about the genetic aspects of this higher order and a holographic or a holistic view. How do we get our hands on it? I think that in terms of, first of all, I'm interested, and secondly, I think that that's a way to get funding and research, even though it would not be primary research, it would fund primary research. Do you have any notions how we would go about putting together a proposal for, say, for example, a CRISPR manipulation of genetics based on whatever outcomes we want?
See, I am not a genetician. I don't know how to implement these theoretical views in a lab, but in my book published on Amazon, I have a full chapter related to experimental possibilities, experimental pathways that may open up with this new view in cosmology, this new view in psychology and in parapsychology. So, as you are speaking especially about genetic aspects, of course, there are, and I tried to link with some very high credential scientists about starting some experimental work on these lines, especially on proving the threefold genomic structure of the human embryo, yes. Up to this point, I have no substantial reply from somewhere that people might be interested in setting up such a very serious research program. I will be anyway here and ready to work with anyone wanting to investigate deeper these aspects on an experiential basis, on an experimental basis, in high-tech biolabs, and so on. Anyone interested in collaborating with me, in cooperating with me in such projects, I am very, very eager to do so and to be in such a team.
Okay, great. So there's another hand up. I'll go ahead and ask Quell, if you can unmute yourself.
I would just like to reiterate a question that is also in the chat. Where can we find references to the embryological dynamics you mentioned?
You can find a lot of references in my book in the Amazon.
Okay.
About the reincarnation is plenty of references, is plenty of bibliography, very pertinent to each point and point. And there I detailliate maximum possible for this moment all our ability to comprehend such very complex mechanisms. If someone is interested, there is this book on the Amazon platform, and with a very rich bibliography there, everything is there. here I can't detail all this bibliography, which is very vast.
Understood. Well, thank you, Adrian. Alexander, I think I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much,
Thank you much, Adrian.
Dr. Klein. And hopefully you can stay with us for a bit now. We are going to move and shift. Now, this is the last thing we're going to be doing today. So thank you for all of you who have stayed with us. And this is going to change a little bit the energy that we have here, because now we're going to move from being in a listening mode to being in interactive mode. We're going to have breakout rooms, and we're going to be able to talk with each other. And also in the breakout rooms, we're going to distribute as much as possible those of the speakers you've heard. And so you might end up with one of the speakers as well in your breakout room. Richard, do you want to say a little bit about the breakout rooms, and then we'll set things up and send people off there, and we'll tell them how much time they have. This is your chance really to co-create meaning.
So this is an opportunity for everyone to connect with other people here today. We're going to have 2 breakout rooms, one today and one tomorrow. And today the focus is going to be on speaking about what cosmology in your life has affected you prior to today, coming into the symposium. And tomorrow we'll talk about how your views may have changed after being here in the symposium. So that's the theme today.
That this is what we call the conversation question. This is what's supposed to stimulate the conversation. So that's the default question. But in your small group, if something else arises, this is not homework. You don't have to focus on this question, but this is what we're hoping that you can get a way of getting going. If something else is up, feel free to bring it into play. We're going to have, is that correct? We have 20 minutes, Richard?
Yes, that's right.
So we have 20 minutes. And so do try to be participatory, respectful, appreciative, and humble when we engage with each other here. We're not trying to sell each other anything. We're trying to listen and learn. So, and make sure that in your small group, everyone has a chance to speak, which means I should shut up so we can go and do this.